Hey guys, Chris of the Polish Geek, and since 2024 is officially behind us, Happy New Year by the way, I forgot to say it in my last two videos when I got back, but Happy New Year now. So with 2024 officially over, it's now time to do top 10 best and worst list of 2024, but as is my tradition, I generally start with worst first, because best I think is a much better list, so that's why I always start with top 10 worst movies of 2024. And there are quite a few bad movies this year actually, and I will say this, that Mufasa as well as The Crow are not on this list. I mean, I already know for a fact they're trashy movies and wouldn't be surprised if either one of them was actually at the top spot, but reason they are not on this list is simple. I haven't seen them. Like, I refuse to see any live-action Disney remake in theaters, so that's why I haven't seen Mufasa. But as for The Crow, it's just like I missed out when it came out, and then I heard all the trash. I mean, I never was excited for it in the first place, but I've been hearing so many, and I mean many trashy things about it as soon as it came out, and then I didn't get a chance to see it, and then later I thought that it was no longer worth it at this point. Like, why would I bother wasting my time on a movie that sounds like trash and that shouldn't even exist in the first place? So yes, that's why The Crow and Mufasa are not on this list, but trust me, if I seen them, I betcha they would probably be, one of them would maybe even be the top spot, who knows. But now let's get on with my top 10 worst movies of 2024. But first, before we start with the official list, let's get on to some dishonorable mentions first. And my dishonorable mentions are, and that's I consider the most overrated movie of 2024, and that's Furiosa, a bad Mad Max saga. Like I mean, I love the world building, but other than that, like, Furiosa, even though she's the main character, she practically feels so disconnected from the rest of the movie. It feels just she's just like thrown there in for the sake of their main character, but then all this stuff revolves, like, she barely has anything to do with any of it, and she's also just so bland and all that, and none of the characters are particularly likable. I guess the most likable is Furiosa's mother in the beginning of the movie, and then she dies quickly and all that, like. And then again, I never was particularly a huge fan of Mad Max Fury Road. I always thought this movie was overrated also anyway, and Furiosa is pretty similar to that, I guess. So that's my first dishonorable mention, as well as the Venom: The Last Dance. I mean, this Venom movie certainly is somewhat better than the first two Venom movies, but then again, that doesn't say much. It still doesn't take away from the bigger problem, I think. Venom and Spider-Man villains in general, and certainly Venom of all of them actually, is certainly not the type of character I would want a solo movie. Like, I think Venom works much better when he's simply a villain to Spider-Man. Yeah, like, but I certainly don't want a solo movie about him, like. And then again, this movie, Venom: The Last Dance, is certainly better than the first Venom movies, but then again, it doesn't say much. The reason I say it's slightly better than the first two Venom movies, because for all its faults, at least the supporting cast is more likable, and I was somewhat more interested in their character than in the previous two, but then again, they were all very much wasted, and it still pretty much suffered from the same problems that the first two Venom movies suffered, of being cheesy, action being silly, and the story not being interested, and me not really being invested in the arc of the main character. And most importantly, what I said already, I don't think Venom works for me as a protagonist. To me, Venom works when he's simply a main villain to Spider-Man. Nothing else. So, yes. And finally, the Garfield movie. I mean, this movie is just pretty much for kids movie. I mean, like, when I was gonna, I mean, it's probably better than the Garfield live action movies, but then again, that doesn't say much, because it's still very much for kids. Like, what's really good about animated movies is when they're done in a way that they can appeal to both kids and adults alike. But this certainly is not it. Like, this is very much strictly a kids movie. It was so forgettable. As soon as I was done with it, I thought, like, After, as Jeremy John says, I won't remember this movie in T-1 day. Yep, that's what the Garfield movie was. Pretty much, very much a movie purely for kids, and only kids will enjoy it, in my opinion. So, those are my dishonorable mentions. And now, let's get on with the actual list. And at number 10, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Like, I was kind of looking forward to this movie actually, because I really enjoyed Ghostbusters Afterlife. So, I thought that continuing the adventures of those legacy characters, I got kind of invested in Ghostbusters Afterlife. I was really looking forward to it, and also when I found out that the theme of freezing will be there, I got even more hyped, because I do like themes of freezing, but at the end of the day, this movie is just so boring and uninteresting. I mean, like, it introduces just so many different characters, as well as so many plot lines that really go nowhere and aren't interesting. I mean, and the reason they're probably doing that, because they're trying to already set up so many different spin-offs and all that, instead of actually focusing on the story right in front of you. I mean, like, why? Like, they don't even know if people are gonna be interested or are gonna enjoy the movie, and they are already setting up so many new storylines, which is actually one of the most common problems of modern Hollywood, among other things. Like, instead of actually trying to focus on a standalone story they're actually making right now, they're just creating more and more plot lines just to set up that sequels that likely won't even get made in the first place. And as a result, the movie isn't interesting. I mean, like, even the legacy characters from the previous movie were not interesting in this one. Like, I guess the only character whose arc I was somewhat invested in was the ghost character, but that still doesn't save an overall bloated mess of the movie. And even the villain wasn't frightening at all. It's like we are told that the villain is frightening, but it wasn't whatsoever. And it also looks so bland with the CGI. Yep. Yeah, I really enjoyed Ghostbusters Afterlife, but Ghostbusters Frozen Empire... sorry, bloated mess. Number 9. The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Like, I've been hearing like quite a few good things about this movie, that it's like a fun action movie and all that, and that similar to Inglourious Basterds, but really, what? It's an insult to compare it to Inglourious Basterds. Inglourious Basterds is a really awesome movie, like it's one of Quentin Tarantino's best movies. Like, it has a well-written script, intelligent story, intelligent characters, like, but this seems like more like a insulting ripoff that desperately tries to be Inglourious Basterds, but first fails miserably, like in every way, shape or form. It's like a bunch of these dudes that are going around and shooting Nazis, but because those Nazis practically feel like robots just standing there, it feels like there's no tension. It's just so silly and all that. It's like they aren't even trying to shoot back or anything. It's just like they're standing there waiting to be shot, and the main characters just come off as little boys that just got their toy guns and just going out and hitting at paper targets, just like to have fun. And I don't even remember any of the main characters because they were all so boring, so bland. Like, I mean, I remember they had some backstories introduced of why they do what they do, but I don't even remember anything at this point. And even the actors, I mean, like Henry Cavill is a great actor, but even he was completely forgettable in this movie. But honestly, I don't blame him, because he only was doing what the script told him to do. And the script, it's not like he could do much with a so badly written script, but yep. This is one of the worst and most silly action movies I've ever seen. And I do think that the fact that there was so much praise going on for this movie shows how much standards for Hollywood have, in fact, lowered. Coming in number 8, and this is the movie that I admit I kind of actually praised on my review when I first saw it, which I think I was being too generous on it, because it's Gladiator II. Like, I love first Gladiator. Like, the first Gladiator I think is a masterpiece. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I gave it the whole you should be watching treatment. Check this out, by the way. It's one of my favorite videos, but yes, the first Gladiator is simply a masterpiece of filmmaking, cinema, But this is literally nothing more than a poor ripoff, like masquerading as a sequel. Like, I was kind of opposed to making a sequel to Gladiator from the beginning. I mean, because I was always saying that if any movie never needed a sequel, it's Gladiator. But and then when I saw the trailers, I thought that maybe. I mean, I was saying it's even before the trailers. Trailers just confirmed it. I was saying that Ridley Scott revisiting ancient Rome is a great idea, but why make it a sequel to a masterpiece? Why not just make its own standalone story? Like, I will do a comparison that I constantly do because I just love this comparison. I have to do it again, sorry. Like, Kingdom of Heaven, the director Scott, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, was awesome, and then Ridley Scott, instead of just making a sequel to Kingdom of Heaven, he decided to revisit the Crusades period with a different medieval epic, Robin Hood, which I find very, very underrated. I love Ridley Scott's Robin Hood. It's probably the last great movie by Ridley Scott in my opinion, actually. But see, two medieval movies, but both standalone separate stories. So if Ridley Scott truly wanted to revisit ancient Rome, which I thought was a great idea, he just should create a entirely new original story instead of making a sequel to a masterpiece. Because like, this movie, like, I admit, the visuals are amazing, as well as the look and all of it, and the costumes and the recreation of the ancient Rome, like, all of that is pretty spectacular, right? But then again, the first movie already had it all. But what this movie suffers from is the story and the main character. Like, the main character, Lucius, I mean, like, he's just so boring and bland that he feels like a Maximus ripoff, but Maximus is a fantastic character, while this guy feels just like a Maximus ripoff. And even the fact that he's Maximus' son was pretty silly, because if you really think about it, I mean, the movie did kind of allude that it could have been a possibility, but at the end of the day, if you really think about it, it doesn't really make sense. Like, because Lucius and Maximus' actual son from the first movie were the same age, but so you'd imply that Maximus was basically cheating on his actual real wife. That's why it really made no sense for him to be his son, but it's small in the grand scheme of things. Overall, the movie is practically a rehash of the first movie, but everything is just so much worse. And even, as I said, I kind of been too generous to this movie when I first saw it, but then I saw the movie again with my father, who wanted to see it, and after a second viewing I thought, oh my gosh, it was just so boring, and I was just almost ready to fall asleep and just looking at my phone to see what time is it, just waiting for it to end. Like, oh my gosh, like, as I said in my first review, the movie was only great when it wasn't trying to imitate the first movie, except that it tried to do it 99% of the time, so, which means that it wasn't really good, like, and as I said, on my second viewing I just found it so boring. Like, the first Gladiator I could watch over and over again, but this I will likely never touch again. Yup. Everyone was saying Gladiator never needed a sequel. They were so right. Number 7, and it really pains me to say this, but The Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim. Like, yeah, it's painful for me to put a movie set in Middle-earth on my worst list, but that's what we get. I was kind of looking forward to it because I thought the animation looked beautiful as I seen the trailers. I mean, the actual movie, the animation, I'm probably far more generous on it than most people, but I wouldn't say it's quite as good as it looked in the trailers, but I'll give it the credit. The animation is still pretty good, at least I found it pretty good, but everything else just sucks. Like, Hera is just like such an annoying character, and as I said in my review, her complete refusal to like get married is just like so cringy. I mean, okay, I understand she doesn't want to marry this like the main villain, don't even remember his name, he was so forgettable, but instead of just saying, I marry no man, she could have been just simply saying, I just don't love you, which is perfect. Like, making it that she's in love with someone else, that would actually be pretty interesting and could stuff for a compelling story, but it's like, I married no man is just so cringy. And even the main villain who I just talked about, he's just like so boring and forgettable and like uninteresting, and his motivation isn't even clear. It's like the movie wants to make him sympathetic and at the same time not sympathetic. Like, what do you want to do? And the whole plotline is just so boring and uninteresting, and worst of all, it's simply not what Tolkien wrote. Like, Tolkien did describe the history of Helm Hammerhand, but all he described was just like he had a daughter and that's pretty much it. Yet Hera basically became a complete main character in this movie. Like, even though that's obviously not what Tolkien would do. Like, I mean, if J.R. Tolkien truly wanted Hera to play an important role in the story, he'd write about her. But he didn't. He didn't write a single thing about her. So I don't want excuses. Oh, we barely know anything about the story of Helm Hammerhand and his family. Oh, just few appendices. Again, if Tolkien truly wanted Hera to be an important character, then he would write a lot more about her than he did. But he didn't. So clearly he did not think she was really that important to the story. I mean, I guess it's slightly better than the Rings of Plagiarism, but again, that's not saying much. I mean, like, because the original Lord of the Rings movies by Peter Jackson are my most beloved movies ever made. And in general, I think J.R. Tolkien is the greatest storyteller and world builder that has ever lived. And I even find the Hobbit movies pretty underrated, but War of the Rohirrim, it very pains me to say, but yep, it's at number 7 on my list. And you know what else? Despite this movie being gigantic on nostalgia bait, it sometimes didn't even feel like a movie set in Middle Earth. Like, halfway through the movie, even less than that probably, I literally forgot I was technically watching a Lord of the Rings movie set in Middle Earth. Yup, that's how disconnected it felt from Middle Earth, despite the whole giant nostalgia bait. And one more thing, as I said, I was looking forward to this movie because I thought it was gonna be an anime, but it was only an anime animation-wise. Like, this is very much a Western production. Like, outside of animation, this is very much a Western production, and it very much shows. So, again, it really pains me to put a Middle-earth story on my worst movies on this list. But that's what happens when you have people who don't care. Number 6. Craving the Hunter. I mean, like, I'm really getting tired of this whole Sony making those, like, Spider-Man villains movies. I mean, like, none of them are good. Like, none of the 3 Venom movies were particularly good, as well as Madame Web was trash, and Craving the Hunter, I guess, is slightly better than Madame Web, but again, that's not saying much. I mean, the movie still has very terrible editing, terrible action sequences, and nothing in this movie is interesting. I just found it so boring and bland, and all the actors, like Russell Crowe and all that. I mean, those are pretty talented actors, but they're all terrible in this movie. Yep. But I'm glad this is the last one of all those live-action Spider-Man villains movies. I mean, like, none of those movies are good, and they never ever needed to exist. So I'm glad this is the last one. If you just want to put Spider-Man villains in live-action, why not just put them in Spider-Man movies? Like, that's what probably me and most fans would want. We would want those villains to be an actual foes of Spider-Man, not just get their own solo spin-off movies. Again, glad this is the last one. Number 5. Madame Web. And yep, I hated the movie when I watched it, and now I almost remember so little of it at this point because it was so everything was so bad. I remember that the acting was terrible, as well as were all the characters, and the action and the story was completely boring and ridiculous and didn't make a single sense in any of it. Like, but I probably suggest you check out my review if you truly want to know why I hated this movie, because at this point I don't even remember any of it. Like, even some of the other bad movies are still memorable to me because I remember like few details, but from this I almost don't remember nothing at this point. All I remember is that the plot was completely nonsensical and none of the characters were likable or interesting, and that there was indeed lots of political messaging, as well as that everything in this movie was just terrible. Madame Web at number 5. Number 4. Damsel by Netflix. And I mean, like, this is like literally one of the cringiest movies I've ever seen. First and foremost, political messaging here is just so strong. Like, I actually try to avoid talking of that subject, but when it's so strong in a movie, it's just unavoidable. And like, yeah, the political messaging here is just like at its strongest, and there is not a single second where the movie doesn't spare just shoving more and more political message down your throat. And even the whole concept and story is just ridiculous. Like, a princess agrees to marry a prince only to find out that his family wants to sacrifice her. Like, it doesn't get more nonsensical than that, and none of the characters are likable or interesting or anything, and I don't even blame Millie Bobby Brown. Like, she only did what the script was telling her to, and I haven't even finished that movie because like I turned off halfway through because I couldn't get, because it was just so cringy. Yup. This movie is like basically a perfect example of what's wrong with modern Hollywood. Coming in number 3, and this is a perfect example of how terrible Disney has become, and this is Moana 2. Like, I was never particularly a huge fan of the first Moana movie anyway. I always thought it was really overrated, but admittedly, I haven't seen it for a long time. I wouldn't be surprised now if I gave it a watch. It probably would seem much better in retrospect now because of how all the modern Disney movies are trash, but this one is literally one of the worst. Like, it's worse than Raya and the Last Dragon, possibly even worse than Wish. I mean, like, this movie is just trash. Like, I mean, even the animation doesn't look as particularly as good as it looked in the first movie, because the first Moana movie, I could at the very least, the redeeming thing about it was that really pretty beautiful animation, but this movie doesn't even have that. Like, I've been hearing that this was apparently supposed to be like a mini-series at first, and then they just stitched all the episodes together, and it very much shows. Like, it literally does feel like a bunch of different scenes all stitched together to form a movie, but nothing in this movie is interesting. The characters don't feel like they've grown one bit since the first movie. I mean, they're still the same boring and predictable characters that the first movie had, and the songs are even worse. I wasn't even a huge fan of the songs in the first movie, but I say the songs here are actually even worse, and the characters again are boring and all that, and the whole plotline is just super predictable. And in all honesty, I actually left the theater towards the end of the movie, because like, I rarely do it, but I did it here. Yep. Don't like modern Disney, and Moana 2 is like a perfect example of that, because this is literally one of the worst animated Disney movies I've ever seen. In my opinion, it's actually worse than last year's Wish, which says a lot. Number 2, Borderlands. So much for the video game curse has been lifted. Like, yeah, I mean, all 3 Sonic movies are really good, and I had a real blast with all of them. And yes, the Netflix Castlevania series, the first one, are amazing. I really love them, and I also really love live-action Twisted Metal series. That's also pretty great. So, but then again, we're talking about live-action movie adaptations, not all adaptations. But yes, still, so far the only good live-action movie adaptation of the video game is Sonic the Hedgehog. Borderlands, not only it's terrible, it's actually one of the worst adaptations I ever seen. Like, I haven't even played a single Borderlands game. I mean, like, I have some friends who really like Borderlands, and I did see a little of the gameplay, but yep, I can't really say I'm familiar with the Borderlands games, but this movie was an absolute trash. Like, there was not a single good thing about it. Like, all the characters sucked and all that, and even they were reportedly like in their early 20s, like, yet for some reason they pick like actors in their 40s. Like, what the hell? And the whole tone and all of that was just so dumb and silly and all of that, and the action was terrible, and the story wasn't interesting at all, and everything was so boring, and even the world just felt like so weird. Like, and yep, this is literally one of the worst movies I ever seen of this decade, and there was not a single enjoyable thing about it. Like, if I mean, like, and don't blame fans of the games who hate this, because even though, as I've already been saying, I've never played a single Borderlands game, so you can't really say I'm very familiar with the universe, but to all the fans of the games, I'm really sorry that that's the trash they made to represent your video game franchise you love. I'm pretty sure that the video games are much, much better than this. And at number 1, the worst movie of 2024 is Megalopolis. And this is such a shame, because I was kind of looking forward to this, especially that this was reportedly a passion project of Francis Ford Coppola, and like the guy that gave us The Godfather. I mean, I was kind of looking forward to it, especially that it also seemed like very much Hollywood desperately tried to hide this movie, but the movie itself actually seemed pretty interesting, like the whole city of Megalopolis, which is basically like futuristic version of ancient Rome. Like, yeah, that seemed like really exciting, but the movie itself is just like clearly doesn't know what it's wanna be. It's just such a bloated mess. Like it just feels like a bunch of scenes with same actors stitched together. They're completely unrelated to each other. Like, I can't even say what this movie literally is about. It just like feels like, as I said, a bunch of different scenes all stitched together. Like, and I've never seen a more of a mess of a movie than this. Like, I hardly could consider it a movie. More like, as I already said, just like a bunch of different scenes just like stitched together, or taking place in this city of Megalopolis, but instead of actually expanding, telling us more about that city, seeing it just like, and even the dialogue is so terrible. It's like they're constantly quoting like lots of sayings of the ancient Romans, and this is supposedly to immerse you further, but as a result it completely takes you out of the story, and you don't even know what the story really is about or what the characters want to say. Like, if this really was Francis Ford Coppola's passion project, I can't believe he seemingly put so little effort into it. Yep, I'm really sad to call this movie the worst movie of the year, because as I said, I was really hoping this movie would be good, and because obvious that Hollywood was desperately trying to hide it, and as I said, Francis Ford Coppola is the guy that gave us The Godfather. And this was supposedly his passion project, yet all we get is such a gigantic mess of just different scenes all stitched together, all taking place in the city of Megalopolis, as well as a terrible dialogue and just like characters completely making no sense. So Megalopolis officially wins as the worst movie of 2024. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is my top 10 worst movies of 2024. But soon, I'm about to do another list, top 10 best movies of 2024, which will be a much more positive list. But those are the 10 worst movies of 2024, and those movies were really terrible. But enough negative, time to get ready for a much better list, which will be top 10 best movies of 2024. So, thank you all of you for checking out this video. Press the like button, please subscribe to this channel, and see you in the top 10 best movies of 2024. Talk to you then, bye!